Mike Garrett wasn't the kind of guy you'd invite to a barbecue or a neighborhood gathering. Most of the residents of Little Maple Creek knew him simply as the guy from the garage, a man of few words who preferred the sound of an engine to the hum of conversation. He lived in the back of his own garage, where he spent his days among old tools, rusty parts, and projects that no one but him seemed to understand. The garage was located far from downtown, on a plot of land surrounded by trees and silence, which only increased the mystery surrounding him. Some said he had been in the military, others swore he had been in prison. But the truth was more complex than any gossip spread among coffee shops and grocery stores. Mike didn't care what they thought. After all, if anyone knew what really went on inside there might be no more silence. That morning, everything seemed like any other day in Maple Creek. The shy sun was breaking through the thin fog. Roosters were crowing on the surrounding farms, and the smell of burning oil was already permeating the air around the shop. Mike was adjusting the carburetor of an old pickup truck when he heard light footsteps approaching. He thought it was just another lost customer until he looked up and saw Liam, the kid with the backward cap and worn-out backpack who lived 2 blocks away. Liam was curious, the kind who took apart old radios just to see how they worked, and that week his curiosity had gone beyond limits. He had noticed strange men coming and going, most of them with military tattoos, always at night. The day before, he had climbed a nearby tree and peered through the frosted glass window. He saw a gurney, tubes, and what looked like a small operating room. The next morning, he went to get an explanation. Mike could tell right away that the boy had seen more than he should have. Liam walked into the garage with a look of fear and fascination mixed with his, as if he were faced with something dangerous but impossible to ignore. He tried to hide it, starting a conversation about the truck's engine, but Mike wasn't naive. He'd seen that look before. It was the same one he saw in the veterans who came in carrying not only physical wounds, but traumas that no one on the outside could understand. With a heavy sigh, Mike locked the front door, asked Liam to sit down, and for the first time in years told someone on the outside part of the truth. He said that the men who came to him weren't criminals, but soldiers cast aside by a system that promised to take care of them, and that all he did there was try to fix what time, war, and neglect had destroyed. Liam listened in silence. It was probably the first time anyone had spoken to him as an adult. When Mike finished, he waited for a reaction, but the boy just looked at the floor, thoughtful, and said that his sister, Emily, also needed help. She had a rare, degenerative disease, and the doctors in town said there was nothing that could be done. Mike hesitated. He didn't treat children, and he had never tried anything outside of the veterans' universe. But something in Liam's expression, perhaps the desperation hidden beneath that improvised courage, made him give in. He asked to learn about the case, review the reports, understand the limits. It was a huge risk. It could ruin everything. Even so, at that moment, Mike understood that today would be different. The kind of day that changes the course of everything. Late in the afternoon, Liam returned with his mother and sister. Emily was small, too thin for her 12 years, and had the sunken eyes of someone who had known pain for too long. The mother held the girl's hand tightly, suspicious, as any mother would be when taking her daughter to such an unlikely place. Mike asked them to come in, explaining that he was not promising miracles or immediate cures. He would only do what he could. When he saw the scans, he understood why they were so desperate. Emily suffered from a rare condition that compromised communication between the brain and muscles. Conventional medicines were only delaying the inevitable. Mike took a deep breath, mentally revisited every experiment, every technique he had tested on his other patients, and decided to give it a try. He had no time for ethics committees or protocols. He only had this moment, and he knew that if it didn't work, it would be the end not only of the workshop, but of that girl's only chance. The first application was done carefully. Mike prepared everything himself, with the precision of someone who had repeated the process dozens of times. While Emily's mother watched in silence, Liam waited outside, walking in circles on the sidewalk as if each step would ease his anguish a little. Night fell, but the garage was still lit, and rumors were already beginning to spread throughout the neighborhood. No one knew exactly what was going on, but the lights being on late and the presence of strangers fueled suspicion. In the city center, in a small bar full of loud voices, rumors began to circulate. People said that Mike was messing with the wrong thing, that the place should be investigated. It was only a matter of time before someone filed a formal complaint. And, inside the garage, Mike knew this better than anyone. But by then, he had already made his choice. The next morning, 2 black cars with tinted windows pulled up in front of the garage. It was the kind of scene no one expected to see in a town like Maple Creek. The federal agents got out, briefcases in hand and badges around their necks, and walked straight up to the front door. The neighborhood stopped. Some people peered out the windows, others filmed from afar with their cell phones. Mike had known this moment would come, but he hadn't expected it to be so soon, not even with the girl still recovering in the back. The agents entered without ceremony. They began to rummage through files, ask questions, and most importantly, take notes. Mike remained calm. He didn't try to hide anything. He showed them the equipment, explained the procedures, and handed over records. They said that an anonymous tip had raised suspicions of illegal medical practices. Their tone was harsh, as if he were already guilty. And no matter how firm Mike was, it was impossible not to feel the weight of that accusation. Emily was still on the makeshift stretcher, sleeping after the treatment. Her mother was trying to understand what was happening, frightened by the sudden movement. One of the officers asked everyone to leave the place, claiming that it would be closed until the investigation was concluded. Mike didn't react. He just walked over to the girl, carefully arranged a blanket over her, and before leaving, whispered that she would be fine. Outside, Liam watched everything with a knot in his stomach. He felt responsible after all. He was the one who discovered everything. Guilt and anger mixed together, especially when he saw how the people in the town, who knew nothing, pointed and whispered as if Mike were a criminal. That image of a silent hero was about to be destroyed, and no one seemed interested in knowing what was really happening inside. But what none of them imagined was that the story was about to turn upside down. That same afternoon, while the garage remained sealed with yellow security tape, a third black car appeared, this time without sirens, in no hurry. A man in a simple suit, but with a firm posture, got out, accompanied by another man with shaved hair and a military look. They went straight to the federal agents. No one knew exactly who they were, but their conversation was enough to change the mood of the place. Within minutes, the tape was removed, the papers collected, and the agents began to act more relaxed. Mike watched from a distance, his face tense, trying to decipher what was happening. It was then that one of the men took him aside and introduced himself as a consultant for the Department of Defense. He said in a low voice that some of what Mike did was indeed registered, although under confidential protocols that were never officially approved. In other words, he was part of something bigger than he imagined. The shock was visible on Mike's face. For years, he had believed he was acting on his own, guided only by his conscience and experience. But now, he was hearing that, even without knowing it, his actions were part of a pilot project that had begun years ago, during his time in the military, and then abandoned due to lack of viability. Some of the veterans he treated had actually been quietly referred by the system itself. What Mike had thought was clandestine help was, in part, an unofficial continuation of something the government had refused to publicly acknowledge. The difference now was that everything had come to light. The consultant explained that, because of the complaint, a National Security Committee had had to re-evaluate everything, and given the positive results and patient reports, they had decided to officially recognize Mike's practices. Instead of punishment, he would receive protection, logistical support, and the chance to expand his work legally. The villain the city had feared was about to become a symbol of resistance and care. The news spread faster than any rumor had ever come before. Within 24 hours, Mike Garrett's name was on local blogs, regional newspapers, and even in a short segment on state television. What had once been a secret locked away in the shop's walls became a headline: "Mechanic treated veterans with experimental techniques recognized by the government." But in Maple Creek, the reaction was mixed. Some publicly apologized for having judged before understanding. Others, more stubborn, preferred an embarrassed silence. Most impressive was the movement that formed in front of the shop in the following days. Men and women, many of them with faded military insignia on their clothes, showed up to thank him in person. One by one they came in, hugged Mike, left letters, medals, photographs. No one asked for the spotlight or recognition. There was just gratitude, and that seemed to be more than enough. Emily, on the other hand, showed visible improvement. It was still too early to talk about a cure, but the first signs showed an improvement that no other previous treatment had achieved. She could move her fingers more precisely again, she could sit up without help, and most importantly, she could smile again, something she hadn't done in months. Her mother, who had previously avoided contact with Mike, now saw him as the last real hope they had. Liam, however, was as silent as ever, watching everything with a mixture of pride and a weight on his shoulders. He knew that without his curiosity, perhaps none of this would have happened. At the same time, he understood that the exhibition had changed Mike's life forever. The workshop, once a refuge and anonymity, was now a symbol, and symbols, he knew, rarely become invisible again. With this new visibility came the proposals. Universities wanted to study Mike's methods, medical institutions offered partnerships, and a government research group suggested turning the workshop into an official rehabilitation center for veterans. But Mike hesitated. He never wanted the spotlight, much less to become a model for something he couldn't control. He preferred direct contact, silent listening, care that didn't require a badge or platform. Still, he knew he couldn't ignore everything that was at stake. So he accepted a single proposal: to continue working in the same space, with the same principles, but now with the support and structure necessary to reach more people. No more luxury clinics or headquarters in capital cities. The idea was to keep everything the way it worked, but with safety, resources, and dignity. Liam followed everything closely. He started helping out in the workshop on the weekends, learning how to clean equipment, organize files, and understand how applications worked. Mike treated him with more firmness than kindness, but it was easy to see the trust there. Emily, in turn, started visiting the place as if she were visiting a loved one, sometimes just to leave a note, sometimes to draw while her brother and Mike worked. What started as a curious intrusion became routine, and routine became change. Liam's family, once plunged into silence and despair, now smiled more often. In town, whispers gave way to respect. Mike, who for years lived in the shadow of his own past, was now seen as someone who faced the impossible without expecting applause. And even with all this upheaval, he continued to start his days the same way, opening the workshop before sunrise and turning on the old radio that sat next to the workbench. That particular morning, Mike stood a little longer than usual in front of the workshop door before opening it. The sun was still shyly on the horizon, and the air carried that cold smell of wet earth. Beside him, Liam waited with the spare key in his hand, ready for another day. It was hard to imagine that, just a few weeks ago, everything there seemed about to fall apart. Mike wasn't much of a talker, but at that moment, he turned to the boy and said, almost in a whisper, that the most important things he had ever done in his life began without any warning, without a plan, only with the decision not to leave anyone behind, and that, if he could go back in time, he would do everything exactly the same. Liam just nodded. There wasn't much to say in response. The workshop opened, the lights turned on, and soon the first footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. Another day was beginning, but with a different weight, the knowledge that everything was now part of something bigger. And even if no one there said it out loud, Everyone knew that the city would never be the same again. The story of a reclusive mechanic, a persistent boy, and a girl who wouldn't give up on her own body began to circulate in places they had never set foot in. But for Mike, the real impact wasn't in the news or the recognition. It was in the eyes of those who walked through the door without hope and left with a little more faith in humanity. It was in the silence of the mornings, in the sound of repaired engines, and in the looks that no longer saw him with fear, but with respect. He didn't think he was a hero, and perhaps he never would be. But now, at least, he knew that that workshop, as full of scars as he was, had become a turning point, a place where overcoming was not a speech, it was a choice, it was practice, and above all, it was real.